climate change is getting worse.
The White House issuing a dire report on climate change.
It says it's happening now and it is being felt today.
For the last 10,000 years, the climate has been relatively stable. And everything we have built, we have done in this period of relative climate stability.
The average temperature in the U.S. has risen by nearly 2 degrees. Sea levels are projected to rise by 1 to 4 feet.
Between 95 and 97% of scientists agree that climate change is happening now, that it's damaging the planet, and that it's man-made.
If we keep doing what we're now doing, we will face unthinkable catastrophe.
Good evening, everyone. I'm MarySue Barrett with the Metropolitan Planning Council, and I'm really delighted. I'm excited to be here tonight as your moderator. You've already seen in these brief minutes we've been together the talents of LiveLab, which makes my job a lot easier tonight. So we even have video introductions in a moment of our panelists. I just want to set the stage, though. The context is really one of learning tonight. So we're here to challenge ourselves, but also to access new information. And I put myself squarely in that category. Also, hopefully, to meet some interesting new people, to involve an online audience. And we're excited about continuing to build the waves of interest for this Preparing for Climate Change event. You have the chance to even begin before we get to the Q&A session in the last half hour by tweeting, if you're so inclined, #ClimatePanel. Your questions, your comments will help us get the conversation moving. And tonight is going to be one that I think spurs some of us, hopefully many of us, to additional action. The Metropolitan Planning Council likes to be part of conversations like this because we've been around for 80 years as a problem-solving organization. We're not governmental. We work at the intersection of government and business and community, and we bring folks together around the art of the possible. So ideas from other places, ideas grounded in science and data, bringing the right people together, doing demonstration projects. Those are all the tactics that we have found successful, and I think they're interwoven into this conversation this evening. So I was delighted to be asked to participate. To bring up our panel now, we have a few video introductions. We have 4 expert panelists. They all come from a slightly different perspective, which I think is terrific, and will also help us learn and challenge each other a bit. So our first panelist is Professor Don Wuebbles from the University of Illinois, and let's take a quick look.
My name is Don Wuebbles. I'm a professor at the University of Illinois in the Department of Atmospheric Sciences. And I really worry that our children and grandchildren are going to look back on us and say, what were those people thinking? Look at the world they've left us. Somehow we need to convince our fellow human beings that this is something they got to take seriously and we need to do something about.
Welcome, Don. We're lucky because Don is one of 2 members of the National Climate Assessment on our panel today, so we're really thrilled that you are here. We also want to welcome Karen Weigert. Karen is part of Mayor Emanuel's administration, and let's have a quick peek at what Karen has to say in her introduction.
My name is Karen Weigert. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer at the City of Chicago. One of the things I did before I joined the city is I was a producer and a writer on Carbon Nation, a film on solutions to climate change. In Chicago, the 2 largest sources of emissions are buildings, so it's energy to heat, cool, and operate over 500,000 buildings. The other big source of emissions is transportation. So we've got huge opportunities now to reduce our energy use and save dollars. And part of that is addressing climate change explicitly.
Absolutely. Welcome, Karen. Our third panelist tonight, you're about to meet Mary Gade.
I'm Mary Gade, and I'm the president of Gade Environmental Group. The important thing that I'm concerned about is that people recognize this is an issue that requires their attention because it will impact their lives. Climate change is happening now. It's not an issue for the future.
I have a 4th panelist to introduce, but he won't be walking up those stairs quite yet, because if you take a peek at your watch or on your phone, you'll note that Tom Skilling is on the air right now. So he actually taped not only his video introduction, but also some early remarks, and then he'll be joining us for the Q&A conversation, as only Tom can do to be in two places at once.
I'm Tom Skilling. I'm the chief meteorologist for WGN-TV and the Chicago Tribune. The evidence is in. There's no longer a debate. Climate is changing, and I believe it. I see it every day in my work. That anybody can come forward now and call this a hoax or say it's not happening, to me, is extraordinary and really frightening.
So again, Tom will be joining us shortly. We're really thrilled to have the four of you together, each with very distinct perspectives, and some of you have experienced this from a variety of perspectives already in your careers, and we're going to tap into all that great information. No one better to kick us off than Professor Don Wuebbles. Don has been a member of the National Climate Assessment, which just a few months ago came out with its recommendations, and so that is where we would like to start. We thought it would be the perfect foundation to learn a little bit from Don about the priority recommendations, a little bit probably about how much work it was to get through that process, and importantly, what he learned in that process. So he's got a number of slides to share with us. Throughout this session, just remember the Twitter feed for tonight is #ClimatePanel. Please welcome Don.
Thank you. So what I'm going to do is very quickly go through some of, just a few of the highlights from the assessment. I do hope that you all will go to the website for the assessment and actually look at that. You can see the 140-page summary or pieces of that, or you can see the full 870 pages that represented the entire assessment. It was a very significant effort that we spent over 3 years working on. And the reason we did it is because in 1990, Congress passed a law called the Global Change Research Act that requires that every 4 years one of these assessments be done. Unfortunately, it was then soundly forgotten, and the first one didn't happen until the year 2000, and then it was forgotten again, and we finally did this, the second one in 2009, and now we are trying to do it every 4 years, and we were going to publish at the end of 2013, except for the government shutdown, and that delayed us, and so it now came out in 2014. This assessment is the most comprehensive analysis of how climate change is affecting Americans, it's affecting our nation now, and how it could affect it into the future. And so I'm just going to quickly go through some of those findings. Before I do that, though, I want to mention that there was over 300 authors. We had a 60-member federal advisory committee that both Mary and I were part of, and then I led the chapter and 2 appendices that related to the science of climate change. There was many other aspects to this assessment, including very extensive review process, both for the public, for other experts in the science of climate and other impacts and so on and so forth, and 2 special assessments by the National Academy of Sciences as part of this process. We divided the nation into 8 different regions as we did it, so there's separate chapters on each of those regions, and then there's separate chapters for each of the sectors that might be important to Americans, such as water, transportation, energy, agriculture, ecosystems, et cetera. The most significant conclusion that I can give you is that human-induced climate change isn't happening somewhere in the future. It's happening now. We're feeling the effects already. It's moved firmly into the present. In fact, the changes we're seeing in climate are occurring about 10 times faster than tends to occur naturally based on analyses of the past climates going back to the end of the last ice age. We usually talk about temperature change, but it isn't just temperature. There's many other indicators that our climate is changing besides temperature. And it's not just atmospheric temperature, it's also the ocean temperatures are increasing at the same rate as the atmosphere. We're seeing changes in precipitation patterns, and we're seeing changes in severe storms and other severe weather events. And the trends for such events, the likelihood of such events are changing as a result of the fact that our background climate is changing. If you ask me about, what is the biggest surprise for you from the assessment, well, that's probably it. We found out a lot more is happening with severe weather events than I ever expected that we would. And in fact, we're now trying to carry that even further by looking at tornadoes and hail and ice storms and trying to understand how those might be affected by the changing climate as well. But that's ongoing research. If we look at the temperature change in the US, this is for the period 1991 to 2011 relative to 1901 to 1960, we see an increase in temperature throughout almost the entire nation, with exception of a few places in the southeast. We don't fully understand why those areas in the southeast aren't seeing the same change. Part of it's due to changes in precipitation patterns, but part of it is also due, oh, Tom's here. Thought I heard that voice. We'll talk later. Part of that change in the southeast may be due to changes in wind circulation patterns, but part of it may also be due to the deforestation that occurred early in the century and then reforestation that occurred much later. Impacts are apparent in every region and in important sectors, including some of those I mentioned already: health, water, agriculture, energy, and et cetera. Americans are already feeling the effects of the increases in extreme weather, as already mentioned, but also in sea level rise. I don't remember if I have, I don't have a slide on sea level rise. We've already seen an increase in sea level of about 8 inches, and we can expect that we'll see another 1 to 4 feet increase this century. And then it's not going to stop there, folks. It's going to keep going, and it's going to put a lot of our coastal areas into quite large jeopardy. Human activity is the primary cause, primarily the burning of fossil fuels, but land use change also contributes. There are a lot of things we can be doing about this. It depends on the emission levels we make of carbon dioxide, methane, and other gases that contribute to climate change. There are many actions as a result that we can take to reduce future climate change and its impacts. At the same time, we need to recognize that the changes in climate will continue. We can prevent them from being the very highest or very worst impacts, but we will have more changes in climate this century. There's no question about that as a result of these human activities. And so we need to prepare. We need to adapt to the impacts that we can't avoid. So both mitigation, the reduction in emissions that I referred to, is important. There's a lot we can do with conservation of energy. There's a lot we can do in terms of looking at alternative for energy and transportation that will allow us to do that. At the same time, we will need to adapt, and there's many aspects to the ways that we can adapt to those changes in climate that will occur. So again, I invite you to go see the website to learn more about climate change. If you find you have questions about it, don't hesitate to contact me. I'm at the University of Illinois. Thank you.
Thanks, Don. That, you just got a sense of it from the voluminous executive summary, was a big piece of work. And Mary's also been involved with that process a good portion of her time. So we're lucky. We sometimes forget that we have experts right here in our own community that are driving national policy, and that's significant. You heard Tom Skilling arrive. Tom, we're delighted that you're here. And guess what? You guys actually get to relax a moment because of all that work you did on your introduction. We're glad to have you here. So he gets to catch his breath post-broadcast and actually watch himself for a change of pace because, as you'll see in a moment, there's some terrific information that was put together in the presentation online here that we want to share with you. And then we're going to have the best of both worlds in having him participate in the conversation. So sit back, pull out the popcorn. Let's listen to Tom.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tom Skilling, Chief Meteorologist at WGN, and I'm looking forward to joining you in person, and will do so shortly. I'm in transit as this tape plays, but I wanted to make my remarks on tape to permit the trip down to the conference. We've just got done with our 6 o'clock news show. Well, you know, it need be said that we have pressing issues facing our country and indeed our planet, and a science-literate population and the world's best-trained scientific minds are going to be essential to face them. The climate of this planet and the impact we, the inhabitants of Earth, are having on it are a growing concern to me and many others in my profession. Climate change isn't a hoax. It isn't fantasy. That such claims are being made are absolutely preposterous. Climate change is happening, and with dire consequences already evident. Dismissal of its threat by saying climate change has always happened ignores what's different about the shifts that are currently underway. Never have adjustments to the climate occurred at the speed they're occurring at now, and on a planet supporting today's huge and growing population. And such dismissal completely ignores the fact that climate change has had catastrophic effects in the past. Whole species have disappeared. Food production has been radically affected. The Vikings sailed to Greenland during a warm epoch on the planet known as the Atlantic period. Climate change after they got there, and the colonies they set up on Greenland perished as a result of changing temperatures and the ability to produce food. The colder Greenland was no longer as green as it was when they arrived, and the waters they sailed, even to North America, became stormier and more hostile. Some use the cool winter we went through last year and the spring and summer to claim that all is copacetic, that climate change isn't happening, saying, so where's the global warming? Such arguments confuse weather, the short-term mood of the atmosphere, with climate, which takes into account trends of weather over decades and centuries. Global warming is doing, unfortunately, just fine. It's quite alive and very well. Last year, 2013, was the 4th warmest in 133 years of records, and our planet's 10 warmest years since the start of the instrument records have all occurred since 1998. Here are some additional facts. We've had more billion-dollar weather disasters than ever before, 7 of them in the last year alone, 11 the year before. There have been 151 such disasters since 1980, a number without precedent. In 2012 alone, our federal government spent $100 billion on cleanups in the wake of weather disasters. That's more money than was spent by the federal government on transportation and education combined, and it amounts to an effective tax of $1,100 per taxpayer. We've had fires burning in the west and north, a region which has suffered years of drought which has hit areas from the plains westward. Lake Mead, for instance, behind Hoover Dam outside Las Vegas, and the source of water for Las Vegas and Phoenix is so low, the water intakes within the dam, which channel water into turbines that generate electricity, will fail to take in enough water to produce electricity in less than a year if significant rains beyond the flash floods of recent days and mountain snows don't come. Closer to home, residents along area rivers like the Des Plaines have been driven with regularity never before seen from their homes in recent decades. These folks will tell you they have never faced the flooding they've seen with the regularity it's been occurring in recent decades. Extremes of weather, whether of temperature or precipitation, hit with greater frequency and consequence. Heat killed 50,000 in Europe in 2003, 60,000 in Eastern Europe and Western Russia only 7 years later in 2010, when temperatures in regions there at latitudes equivalent to Hudson Bay in North America were hit with weeks of 100-degree and higher temperatures. 6,000 perished this past autumn in the Philippines during Super Typhoon Haiyan, the strongest landfalling tropical cyclone ever observed on the planet. Its 20-foot storm surge leveled low-lying regions of that country like a deadly tsunami, and it came at the end of an amazingly active Western Pacific typhoon season, which featured storm after storm. While we shivered here in the Midwest this past winter, Las Vegas, Phoenix, and Miami registered record winter warmth. So did Alaska, where mammoth avalanches, some of the largest ever observed, occurred. The UK and Europe also saw record warmth and prolific rains. More rain fell this winter on England than at any time since the 1700s. The Thames River reached a 60-year high. A barrage of storms brought record 80 to 90-foot waves to the UK, the highest on record there. These waves ravaged coastal communities and highways. It was so warm, bears came out of hibernation in the warmth across Scandinavia in January, and vegetation bloomed. Snow had to be imported at the Winter Olympics in Sochi, Russia, because of the warmth. Spectators there sunbathed in 68-degree temperatures. It was the warmest Winter Olympics on record. Record heat has occurred in the last year in Australia and South America. Arctic ice has dropped to its 5th lowest level since satellite records began. A quarter of the region's ice has disappeared since the late 1970s, and the ice loss is occurring faster than even computer models have predicted. An area of ice the size of 1.7 times the size of Texas disappeared last year alone. Warming in the Arctic is occurring at more than twice the rate it's occurring here in the mid-latitudes. Ice forms in the winter, but then the shorter cold seasons mean the ice is thinner and it melts more quickly in summer. I travel to Alaska with some frequency, and nearly all of the state's glaciers are in retreat. 10,000 Alaskan walruses were forced to beach themselves as the ice on which they typically rest melts. Native villages lining Alaska's coastline are crumbling into the ocean because the ice, which once buffered these communities from wave action, has disappeared. Diminishing Arctic ice may increase tensions between nations in the years and decades ahead as resource grabs take place as the ice coverage fades. Sea ice has increased in Antarctica, but land-based ice continues losing mass. The continent has the highest mean elevation, more than 6,000 feet above sea level, which is why the ice trends there are different than in the north. But when ice loss in the northern Arctic regions and the sea ice gain around Antarctica are analyzed, ice coverage on Earth is still diminishing, contributing to rising sea levels. And a report just recently indicates the whole West Antarctic ice sheet is so unstable it's expected to collapse in the next 2 centuries, if not sooner. We interviewed Nobel Prize-winning climate change researcher Dr. Don Wuebbles in our attempt to get the message out to the public on climate change. We also visited the National Supercomputing Application folks there who are trying to visualize climate change. And we filed this report for our viewers back last September. I want to share it with you now. Hurricane Sandy, killer floodwaters, and raging wildfires. Scientists from all over the world say our changing climate may be impacting these extreme weather events.
We have a lot of concerns about what those changes in climate can mean to us. It's virtually certain that human activities are responsible for the changes in climate that we've been seeing over the last 50 years.
Professor Don Wuebbles is part of a United Nations organized community that brings together the world's greatest science minds. 830 authors volunteer their time and expertise to increase our understanding of what's going on with Earth's climate system.
So it's really a look at the science by the scientists to assess what is it we know, what has changed in our knowledge, and to make recommendations then to governments to say, well, is this important enough? You should be worrying about it.
Wuebbles tells WGN that the IPCC report will state that warming temperatures are creating a really different climate on our planet. The melting of ice near the poles could raise sea levels by 1 to 4 feet by the end of the century, swamping coastal cities like Miami and New York. The report also links climate change to more extreme weather events.
So if we say it's virtually certain, that means it's a 99 to 100% likelihood that this observation is real. Because the media often wants to treat this as a contentious issue, they want to show both sides, they actually get the impression that there is 2 sides. And in fact, the reality is there really isn't another side to this.
Their confidence grows with each improvement in supercomputers. This brand new National Petascale Computing Facility is located on the campus at the University of Illinois. Just listen to that roar. These are supercomputers at the University of Illinois crunching numbers. The climate is a complex system, so is our atmosphere, and it takes a lot of computing power to forecast and visualize it.
The Blue Waters supercomputer is one of the biggest supercomputers anywhere in the world. It's the biggest at a university campus anywhere in the world, and it can do quadrillions of calculations every second. If you wanted to do a quadrillion calculations, you would need millions of years with a calculator.
The numbers, though,
become more real to people when they can see them through the visualization process.
Donna Cox and the visualization team of the U of I have been working with Don Wuebbles and other scientists to transform complex mathematical computations into stunning simulated video displays.
We have many testimonials from scientists that once they have seen their data visualized, moving, evolving, that they have made new discoveries.
For instance, tornado researchers couldn't see double funnels in their data until it was visualized. This partnership of art and science is a powerful tool to actually show people the warming of the atmosphere both now and in the future, and what is possible if we become better stewards of the environment.
How can we take our understanding of the complex science of what's going on in the climate system and translate it into something that the public can readily understand and say, wow, this tells me why this is so important.
Greater computing power also allows scientists to get down to much better resolutions on smaller scales, like predicting regional climates.
Illinois may be becoming more like Eastern Texas, more like the Dallas area, for example, where most of the summer is above 90 degrees. You have a month of 100-degree days. Well, that's not Illinois as we know it right now.
That scenario is for the end of the century and assumes continued heavy use of fossil fuels. Wuebbles says here in the Midwest, we have a greater likelihood of extreme precipitation events, followed by mini droughts. That could have huge implications for Illinois agriculture.
Climate change is happening, and we have to communicate that. There's no hidden agenda here.
Climate change clearly is a world problem. It isn't just a U.S. problem by any means. It's not that we're going to totally prevent future climate change, but we can keep it to the level where we'll have much less effect than if we followed the pathway we're on now.
I was struck by quite a few things in your video just now, Tom. One that, as someone who works on public policy issues, makes me angry is that we, in response to these extreme weather events, are spending more to respond to those unintended consequences, those emergencies, than we invest in education and transportation. It's mind-boggling. And I know, Don, you didn't get to hear all this, Tom, but when Don gave his opening remarks, we talked a little bit about extreme weather and your interest and your research interest. So now, having seen Tom's piece again, I'm just wondering if you can just tell us a little bit more, Don, about what we need to know, what's next on this extreme weather.
So we're doing analyses of heat waves or extreme warm events we have lesser cold events, but more hot events. But what's really damaging to the public, to society, is when you get extensive periods like that, but also when you get major storms or you get more precipitation coming as larger events, which we're also observing. Over the last 5 decades, we've had a clear increase over most of the country where precipitation is coming as larger events. Well, that means farmers can't get into the fields in the spring as readily. It means we have more flash floods. It means we have more situations in the Midwest with flooding of the Mississippi River, where we've had 3, quote, 500-year floods in the last 20 years. So that's a big concern for us. And even in places like Arizona, where you're seeing a significant tendency for drought, as Tom mentioned, today they're seeing a huge amount of rainfall falling in Arizona and New Mexico. That's all part of this time of year is their monsoon, but this is an unusually large amount. And so what's happening is a warmer atmosphere can hold more water vapor. That's basic physics. And as a result, when we get this kind of synoptic scale storms that can cause precipitation, that water's dumping out, and we're just getting larger and larger events. And that's both for rain and for snow.
And Tom, a quick follow-up for you. I know because so many people feel a personal connection to you because we welcome you into our living rooms. Your own personal conversion, I think, is of interest to people. We kind of started this panel by saying, we're not here to debate weather. We're here to learn and to solve. But many people have not come along that path yet. And I just wonder if you could share a minute about that transformation for you personally.
Well, you know, when I used to hear that the Arctic was going to melt, I thought, well, you're going to have to prove that to me, you know, and then it started happening, and it's proceeded and proceeded. I see it every day. The thing that strikes me, and I'm quite fascinated by Jennifer Francis's work out at Rutgers University, and I know there's still debate even within the science community about details of her work, but she points to the tendency of jet streams to become more meridional, in other words, more amplified. This is when you set up your really extreme weather events, and I see this all the time. Pools of warm air in the Arctic that never existed in the quantities that they do today are gathering up there, and they're leading to what are called blocking patterns. When you develop a blocking pattern, be it a Greenland block or last winter, for instance, I mean, look what's been happening last year. This is basically the product of a blocking pattern that has recurred over eastern Russia and Alaska. The years before that, we had one that was persistent over Greenland. And when you start fiddling around with the jet stream in one region of the atmosphere because of the energy balance that's maintained, you create anomalies all across the planet. It's like a case of musical chairs. Mess up the movement of your participants somewhere, and everybody else suffers at the same time. So look at Sandy. Sandy had featured a dome of warm air over Greenland, a heck of a block. And that blocking pattern kept Sandy on, turned Sandy into the coastline instead of letting it go on the climatologically favored track out to sea. But, you know, it's not a linear process. And I find, I'm a believer now. I go up to Alaska. I've been going up there since 1980. The pullback in the glaciers is amazing. But beyond that, ecosystems are being, I've listened to scientists talk about how habitat is changing up there and all. We see it, the number of these extreme weather events, these aren't just because they're being covered more extensively or better. They're occurring with greater frequency. You know, I mean, look at the hurricane season we've got going in the Pacific right now. This is off the charts. The one out in the western Pacific last year that featured Haiyan, that was only one of many, many storms that went in there. So, and what happened this winter in Europe is stunning. You know, you had surfers surfing waves off Ireland that were, in some cases, 80 feet high up there. They'd never measured anything like that before, and devastation along the coastline. So, the one thing we have to communicate is people can't understand there's a disconnect between the cool summer we've had and the cold winter we had last year. And then when you say to them, well, you've got to understand warming in the mean on the planet is actually driving these anomalously cool pools that are occurring over a relatively limited region of the planet. We happen to live in one, and so you look out the window and you say, how can you talk about global warming when I've been cold all winter long? And you say, well, talk to the folks in Alaska or out west where the abnormal warmth is going on. They're going to tell you they've never seen a winter like this before. It's so warm. So, and the frequency of these extreme weather events is what's amazing. It's not a linear process. Not everybody warms up any more than the whole planet didn't go into a cake of ice during the Ice Age. Some areas stayed warm during that period. It's just there was more of the ice and more of the cold, and we're getting more of the warm, and we're dislocating steering patterns that I look at every day when I look at my upper air charts and my model forecast.
So you've really seen it, and I think that arms us with answers that we can share with our neighbors or coworkers when they bring you those challenges. I think that's really important. And both Don and Tom have spent a lot of time looking locally and understanding, as Don said, the chapters about our Midwest region and about our industries, but also learning more broadly. We also want to bring in the local perspective, and that's why we're so glad that Karen Weigert is part of our panel today. You heard in her introduction that Karen is the architect behind Sustainable Chicago 2015, and so what we wanted to ask her to do is to highlight some of the top recommendations from that, and also think about what all of us in the room might do to do our part. Karen.
Thank you, MarySue. Thank you to all of you who are here and to the rock star panel that I get to be a part of. Gotta love following, no bells, WGN face, and then Mary gets to close it in, who has done stuff around the world and has led the region. So I'm delighted to be here to put Chicago in the middle of this panel and to really talk about what's happening here, what we're all doing, and what we can all continue to do. So it's a great starting point when you think about where we are. So LiveLab, Chicago, we're all right here. And the motto of this city is literally city in a garden. You go back 177 years ago, that's what people were thinking about when they founded this place. And we're quite grateful they picked the spot on the shores of Lake Michigan. It's lovely. But we've been building in that garden for a while now. And this chart got funky, actually, since we saw it last. This is a double version, which you don't need to see. What it's showing is an aerial shot of Chicago. And it's showing you the difference between emissions per acre and emissions per capita. If you look at it in emissions per acre, there are a lot of emissions coming out of Chicago. If you look at it at an emissions per capita basis, Chicago is very light. So this city that we have all built in this garden, from a carbon standpoint, is a very sustainable place to be. We have this wonderful anchor of a core public transit system and wonderful development around that with very efficient housing when you compare it to what's around here. So that's what we've built. So now we think about this question of carbon and how we can continue to be focused on the opportunities for us. The largest source of emissions coming out of Chicago is from buildings. 71% come from heating, cooling, and operating over 500,000 buildings. At the same time, though, we, all of us, government, individuals, businesses, we all spend $3 billion a year to heat, cool, and operate those same buildings. So when you think about the emissions that are coming out, the backdrop that we're all talking about here, buildings is a great place to start. So your home, for example, making your home more efficient, saving some dollars, making it more comfortable, that's a great place to start. So energy efficiency has been a big area of focus for us. We now have an overall effort called Retrofit Chicago that has 3 big areas of focus in it. Your home is one. So looking at ways to make your home more efficient. There's literally a single phone number now that didn't exist before. It's 8559-IMPACT. You can call that and get access to all the energy efficiency programs. Big buildings in the city are increasingly working to make themselves more efficient. We now have 37 million square feet from 48 buildings that have all committed to at least a 20% improvement in energy efficiency, reducing those emissions. The buildings that have already started this have already saved over $2.5 million. So it's a great cycle of reducing your expenses, making your buildings more comfortable, and reducing the emissions that we're all talking about here today. So we are thinking directly about using less. And then you start to transition into using green. So one of the things we did here in Chicago is we have now made it easier and cheaper to install solar around the city. For a standard pitched roof in Chicago, so for people at home, we now have a 1-day permit for you, and we actually reduced the permit fees. So Solar Chicago is an effort this summer that's building off of Chicago Solar Express, 2 different efforts to make it easier to put solar up and around the city. It also gives you a great backup power source as you think about your opportunities. So that transition from using less into using green. And a big piece of that is moving away from coal. So about 3 years ago when the mayor came in and our team came in, there were actually 2 coal-fired power plants that were still working in our neighborhoods here in Chicago. And we're very pleased that those have closed. A tremendous amount of community engagement was involved here. A lot of folks were engaged. Natural gas prices helped as well. They were the largest stationary sources of emissions in the city. This is also a huge health win when you think about our neighborhoods and you think about air quality locally. So we're finding solution after solution to reduce the emissions coming out of our city that are giving us real benefits today. We now buy the city's power coal-free. And so when you're going around the city, you need to move through transportation. Transportation is the second big source of emissions. It's 23%. This picture you see here is of not all, but many of our 3,000 new Divvy bikes. Divvy is the first new transportation system in Chicago in 50 years. There are 3,000 bikes parked at 300 solar-powered stations. That is a healthier way to get around. It's a huge reduction in emissions when you're riding your bike. It's actually cheaper than most other forms of transportation around the city. This complements core work on our CTA system. So rebuilding, for example, the south side of the Red Line, giving more people in Chicago a faster, cheaper, sustainable option to move between their neighborhoods and their jobs. So really thinking about that anchor and thinking about those transportation options is key for us. Now, Chicago is a big transportation city, and we've been one for a long time. So I wanted to share this picture. This is a rendering of the Bloomingdale Trail, or the 606. What it is right now is an abandoned rail line. What it will be next year is a park. Almost 3 miles of an elevated park going through multiple neighborhoods, which will have biking, it'll have walking. It will connect people in new ways in a lower carbon environment, bringing more and more people, more and more reasons to live and stay in the city of Chicago. Wonderful ways to live a lighter carbon experience and have more of that connectivity that we're looking for. And so as we think about all of that movement all around, all of these opportunities are great ways to reduce our carbon impact. But we know from Don and from the scientists and from Tom what is happening in the climate and what the weather projections will look like for us. And we know for us in Chicago that the projections suggest more of those really hot days. They also project more of those really intense storms. So the picture you see here is actually City Hall's green roof. And that, in a sense, bridges between that mitigation question, so how can we reduce our emissions, through to the how can we prepare for changes that might come. So this provides a wonderful cool roof for us, so we have to spend less money air conditioning City Hall, always nice. But it also can capture stormwater in some of those rain events. So as we think about that, it starts to help on that side. And it reduces the heat in general coming off of that roof as we're looking at the downtown environment. So we have more and more opportunities to look at preparing and helping our residents. We know challenges are going to be around heat. So we have very clear requirements on light-colored roofs. We know that we can make it easier for people to have a cool environment if they're in a building like that. We also know that not everyone has access to air conditioning. So we have cooling centers that we open on days when it is very hot. And we have lists of people that we know are vulnerable residents that we do outreach to ensure that they've got access and opportunity there. At the same time, we know there's more and more rain coming. So we've now had 4 10-year storms in the last 6 years. So the math doesn't quite work. So we know that we're seeing weather patterns that are different. And so we're looking at more and more ways to capture stormwater in a place like a green roof or in green infrastructure. And increasingly make sure that that gray infrastructure, the pipes, can handle what is coming as well. So as we think about our city, I'll give you an interesting example. One of the places we're putting in green infrastructure to capture stormwater and keep it out of our system is at 4 of our Chicago public schools. So they have campuses now that are hard surfaces, very impervious. There's a partnership with the city, with the schools, with MWRD, with nonprofits to transform those campuses into greener spaces, capture the stormwater, but also create a wonderful place for kids to play, a wonderful neighborhood amenity, and an educational opportunity for all of us about the practical benefits today of both reducing our emissions and preparing for the changes that might come. So as we think about the city of Chicago, we want to be the most livable, competitive, and sustainable city. We want to be that today, but we also want to be that in the decades to come, and embedding solutions to climate change is a key part of that. So thank you.
Similarly to the national climate assessment, there are many recommendations and sub-recommendations in Sustainable Chicago 2015. So the ones that you heard Karen highlighting are just a small slice of that, but a great cross-section of things that you can be part of. And we're going to share some websites at the very end of places that you can go for additional resources, including the city's plan. You know, Chicago thinks of ourselves as a world-class city and region, and we are, but we're that if we're connected. And so it's so important to stay on top of this debate. It's a debate that Mary Gade knows evolves literally every day and every week because of international and national convenings and gatherings where scientists and policy decisions are made. So we particularly wanted to learn from Mary about some of those most promising policy recommendations and again, what we need to be paying attention to. Thanks, Mary.
Well, good evening. What a privilege it is to be here this evening with you and with this incredible group of friends, colleagues, and climate experts. I'm very lucky. Well, what I'd like to do is start my presentation this evening with a short clip. We've already seen a little bit of this footage earlier in some of the previews to our discussion. But a short clip from the documentary Chasing Ice by James Ballag. And I also want to thank James and his foundation for allowing me to show this clip. It's without a soundtrack, so I'm going to talk a little bit over it, but I'm thinking you're going to find it quite dramatic in terms of how it graphically, in fact, very graphically, shows us how rapidly climate change is occurring. This is a very short clip, but it also, unfortunately, in real time takes place over a very short period as we watch this incredible glacier destroyed. It's a glacier in Greenland, and this is filmed in 2008. I think it's alarming. It's one thing to hear Don and Tom talk about the impacts of climate change, but it's quite another to see it, real world, real time. And that's why I wanted to show you this amazing video. Look at this, in 75 minutes, look how much it's receded. Look how large it is. The width of 2 Golden Gate bridges. The volume loss, 1.5 cubic miles. And look at this, which frames it in a very political perspective. And this is a political issue. So, it's alarming. And after seeing this, any reasonable and thoughtful and observant person is going to say, and what are we going to do about it? That's where the issue becomes simultaneously both simple and very complex. As simple and as complex as anything this world has ever faced before. But the thing that I think is really important to keep in mind when we look at all of this dramatic footage, we hear the stories that all of our experts have shared with us this evening about the impacts we're currently facing as a world and as a nation. Solutions are everywhere. There are things we can do about this. And we should all try and focus tonight on what those solutions are. Addressing the problems is going to take the concerted action of both government at all levels, internationally, nationally, in the United States, at the state level, the state of Illinois, and the city's level, at the city of Chicago, as we just heard from Karen. And it requires, more importantly perhaps, the concerted action and support of business, non-government organizations, universities, and people like you and me. So Don referenced this just briefly, but public policy in addressing climate change separates the responses to it into 2 categories. Mitigation, which are actions to prevent or reduce climate change through reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and adaptation, which is actions to address and prepare for the impacts of climate change. These can be quite expensive, quite complex, or they can be extremely easy. So here's one of my favorite examples of adaptation to climate change. It's raining a lot. We've heard that extreme weather events are bringing more flooding and more heavy rains, whatever. You put on your boots, take out your raincoat, and put up your umbrella. That's adaptation. And I just want to say, so not everything has to be all that complicated. What's another example of adaptation? It's putting building codes in place that require sturdier infrastructure, bridges that can sustain the impact of extreme weather, or putting in building zoning codes that don't allow people to build in floodplains or where there are tidal surges. Mitigation is tended to be a little more complicated because it's generally more costly. But it's things like putting in corporate average fuel economy standards so that when we go buy our cars, progressively we're buying less and less polluting cars. The administration in 2010 put in place the first greenhouse gas emissions for cars and light-duty trucks and vehicles, and they will actually by 2025 result in 56 miles per gallon gas mileage in your car. Hard to believe, but that will help reduce the impacts of climate change. So what I'd like to do right now is just give you a quick snapshot of many of the efforts, not all of them, underway to tackle this challenge, starting internationally. What an exciting time for us all to come together at this event. Next week, on September 23rd, in New York City, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, is convening all of the world leaders, all of business and civil society at something called Climate Summit 2014. It's meant to galvanize action and ambition, leading to the UN climate talks in Paris in 2015, where the world will come together to see if we can actually get a global treaty to address the next round of climate reductions when the Kyoto Protocol expires in 2020. The Secretary General is asking the participants to make bold commitments to keep global temperatures below 2 degrees Celsius as compared to pre-industrial times. There are 8 action areas: agriculture, energy, cities, forests, financing, pollutants, and resilience. And I am proud to say that the United States has already stepped up and taken a bold maneuver when on Tuesday of this week, President Obama announced an initiative to phase out HFCs, hydrofluorocarbons, through voluntary commitments of some of the country's largest chemical firms and retailers, from DuPont to Target to Coca-Cola to Pepsi. This is a huge commitment by the United States because these pollutants are very, very damaging. They're refrigerants. They're in every sort of appliance we probably have in our homes, from refrigerators to air conditioners, and they are 10,000 times more potent in terms of the destruction of and climate destruction than carbon. The result of this initiative, this voluntary initiative, and the collaboration of the government with business will be equivalent to taking 15 million cars off the road for a decade. This is an outstanding example how business and government can come together to do the right thing. And by the way, for those of you who want to do something activist, maybe you should be getting your plane tickets and then offsetting your carbon emissions from that plane trip to New York City. This Sunday, there will be the People's Climate March. Over 100,000 people are expected to rally in New York City to protest climate change and try and get action out of our elected officials to do something about it. And we've heard that the UN Secretary General himself will be there linking arms with the people marching. And now I have a personal appeal to you related to that. It brings me one of the most important things you as a citizen can do, especially in a democracy like ours. You need to let your elected officials know that you care and that you expect action. Having served in government for most of my career, I can tell you that hearing from the public actually matters. March this weekend, send letters or emails, and make your choices at the ballot box based on the candidate that shares your views. It will make the biggest difference. One of the disappointing things to me as a person who's worked in public policy for her entire career is that the United States is not a world leader on this issue. We don't have national climate legislation to reduce carbon emissions. We came close in 2009 when the House of Representatives passed a bill called Waxman-Markey that was going to put reductions in place that would have reduced our greenhouse gas emissions, our carbon emissions, by 17% by 2020 over to a 2005 baseline. But the US Senate dilly-dallied, played politics, and never acted, and the bill died. We never ratified the Kyoto Protocol either. We're a signatory, but we've never ratified it. It took President Obama going to Copenhagen and then the following year in Cancun at the Conference of the Parties that the UN convenes to actually make a commitment, not a legal obligation, but a commitment to that 17% reduction. It's not where we want to be. And in the absence of our Congress acting, the President has issued a climate action plan that has 3 pillars: cutting carbon pollution in the United States, secondly, preparing the US for the impacts of climate change, and 3, leading international efforts to address it. One of the most ambitious things to come out of this is something that US EPA issued in June of this year. It's totally revitalizing and energizing people in the energy space in this country and in the environmental space. People like Karen and I have talked about it extensively, and there has been endless conferences, debates, and whatever. It's called the Clean Power Plan, and it does something really innovative. It, for the first time ever, proposes to put regulatory requirements on coal-fired utilities, fossil-fueled electric generating power plants, to reduce their greenhouse emissions. This isn't a popular thing with everyone, but what it's doing that's really novel and is going to essentially create an energy policy and a regulatory framework that we've never had. Rather than requiring these power plants to put on control technology, pieces of control equipment that usually cost hundreds of millions of dollars and ratchet down the pollution, what it's doing is asking that each state that's involved, and Illinois has an active program and an active outreach right now, put together a proposal that will allow those emission reductions that are required by this to take place through things like renewable portfolio standards, demand-side management, more emphasis on wind and solar and nuclear, and on and on and on. The federal government has asked the state of Illinois to make reductions of 30% by 2030, and overall in the country, the similar kind of a reduction level. This is very exciting because it will be one of the biggest efforts we've ever had to reduce greenhouse gases from the sector of our economy that puts out the most greenhouse gas emissions, about 30-some%. So this is happening real time. The comment period is going on right now. It goes on until October 16th. And if you would like to participate, I urge you to go online. And more importantly, I urge you to let your congressmen and your reps know you care about this.
Thank you, Mary.
Am I done? I want to just highlight a couple of other things before my time is up, which is, how much is that?
Less than a minute.
Oh, excuse me?
Less than a minute.
Perfect. There are lots of other things going on that allow citizens to participate in this process. There are simple things you can do, and Karen alluded to some of the wonderful things that the city of Chicago is doing, but I want to just highlight some of the things you can do as individuals. I don't know if you know that, but each gallon of gas that you use in your car creates 20 pounds of greenhouse gases. So go out there and look to buy cars with better gas mileage. Buy products with the Energy Star label. In the 20 years since EPA initiated this program, it has sold over 4.5 billion more energy efficient products, resulting in $239 billion of savings on utility bills, and prevented an astonishing 1.9 billion metric tons of greenhouse gases from going into the atmosphere, just by going out and looking for that label and buying that product. Take advantage of ComEd's program, where they will come and look at your home and figure out what energy efficient things you can do in it, and they will give you some free appliances and so forth. I don't know if you know this, but ComEd's lighting discounts program, which is in 900 retail stores in the Chicagoland area, has actually resulted in 47 lower LED lights sold so far, roughly 9 per household, and you get a discount. Finally, things like taking out your refrigerator and your freezer. They contain powerful greenhouse gases in them. ComEd will come and pick them up and pay you $35. Make sure you're aware of that and your neighbors are aware of it, because this is how you too, with very little effort, can participate in making our climate better. So in conclusion, what I'd like to say is climate change is a huge problem, but there are opportunities absolutely everywhere. Please take part of it, take advantage of them, and be part of the solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Wow, I'm really overwhelmed at the depth of expertise and actionable suggestions that we've already gotten. Anna's got a couple questions from our online audience that we want to get to next, because they've been waiting patiently. Just let me tell you what we're going to do in our remaining time following those questions. We're also going to invite the panelists to riff a little bit with each other, maybe reinforcing something they heard from each other, or asking a follow-up question about each other's content. So we'd like to give them a chance to learn more from each other. And then we'll also shift to you, interspersing some questions from the online audience and the real present audience. We're delighted that you're here, and there's some really knowledgeable people in our audience as well. So we look forward to getting to your questions. Anna, who have you heard from?
All right, thank you very much, MarySue. So we've had a great following online, and the first question comes from Gandros. He asks via Ustream, can global warming be reversed over time?
So can we reverse damage? Who would like to start that? Don, you're the right person.
Certainly we can. It will take a long time, though, because the amount of carbon dioxide we're putting into the atmosphere is so great, and the lifetime of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is very, very long. Its first lifetime is about 100 years, but then the second lifetime, the next lifetime is over 1,000 years, and that's because it depends on the rate at which carbon dioxide eventually gets into the deep ocean and gets really removed from the Earth's system. So it's a very slow process. But nonetheless, if we started doing something now, we can really slow this down and eventually turn it around, yes.
Another question.
Yeah, another one. This one is from Dana C. She asks via Twitter, if climate change is unavoidable, could we not adapt to it?
Human adaptation. Any thoughts, Tom, on that question?
Well, I think we're going to have to.
Or we're in the process of doing it, I guess.
Yeah, I can't help but think of the flooded subway system in New York. But there's only so much you can do in that regard. I know in Alaska they're trying to physically move native communities to safer locations, that are higher in elevation and less accessible to water. But at some point, like this Antarctic ice sheet that is so unstable now, its demise is now proclaimed as virtually certain at this point. Don can speak to the specifics of this, but my understanding is, Don, that the demise of that ice sheet translates to how much in sea level rise all by itself. It's
many feet.
Many feet. And what can you do about that? Anybody who's been in a coastline and watched an erosion situation can only imagine the devastation that's going to occur as these storms come ashore with higher and higher levels of water. I was talking to Louis Uccellini, who's director of the National Weather Service. He lives obviously in the Washington area, and he said that it's around the Potomac. It's just amazing what he's seen just in the period of time he's been there in terms of what the damage these storms cause because of increased water levels over there. There are certain things you can do. You can, and not all not all the changes that are going to go on are going to be terrible, but enough are that we better do something about it. And when you start fiddling with the, sea level and the storm track that provides the rain that allows us to produce food, you've got some serious problems coming.
Well, Karen also highlighted the how and where we build. Part of the adaptation. So some of it's not immediate, but you see the results by changing policies that then create different kinds of communities. Don?
Yeah, just a very quick comment. If we follow the pathway we're on now, which is heavily dependent on fossil fuels to the end of the century, we're talking about 10 to 11 degree Fahrenheit increase in temperature. And that's just the temperature without going into all these severe weather effects and so on and so forth. But there are also scenarios where we can get much, much lower than that. It depends on our choice. How much do we want to move away from that dependence on fossil fuels to other alternatives for energy and transportation? And we can be at a much lower level where the adaptation is much easier to deal with than if we continue this pathway.
The future is along a continuum, as Don just helped us understand, and we have some choices about where we land. So start thinking about your questions. First, I'm going to turn to the panel. And Mary, since we made you wait until the end to speak, I'm going to start with you. You've invested so much of your time in the National Climate Assessment and other critical conversations. As you listen tonight to your fellow panelists, what struck you? What would you like to emphasize or inquire further about?
Well, it's sort of interesting, as familiar as I am with some of the statistics and the data and the whatever that came out of the National Climate Assessment and has come out worldwide, listening to Don and to Tom talk about these things just sort of took me aback and once again sort of hit me in the face about how we can be so not doing more to address this incredible problem. I was really quite taken with the fact about the impacts on ecosystems and bears coming out of hibernation. And I'm sure that must have some impact on the Inuit and the native tribes and others who depend on that. And Karen, I was really fascinated with the fact, because we didn't talk about it, but one of the things we can do to help counter climate change is not just prevent greenhouse gas emissions from going into the atmosphere or reduce them. We can also try and build up the carbon sinks, the uptake of carbon, and so that will sort of neutralize it. And Karen, it was the first graphic you showed twice on one slide. It was actually really compelling to me.
Per capita.
And I was wondering whether Karen could talk a little bit more about how the city of Chicago maintains that and it's helping building carbon sinks.
This is such an interesting panel, and there are these great questions of reducing what we're emitting and then capturing what's out there. There's actually been some really interesting work just on maintaining landscapes in Chicago in light of climate change. So how do you take care of the open spaces that we have? And so a lot of people have been looking at exactly how you can ensure that, so that we can do a little bit of take some of the carbon out of the atmosphere and put it back where we found it, which is in the ground. So plants are wonderful ways to do that, and we've got to continue to find more and more solutions across the spectrum. A lot of the services in Chicago are not going to be plant covered, but we can find places that are, and that can be another little piece of the solution. People have great opportunities at home, and so it's interesting to think about this panel and some of the conversations. I'm not so keen on people surfing in places they're not supposed to be surfing. That's a little unsettling to me. But I like that they can turn around and think about their home and make a choice that can reduce their emissions now. And that complements then this backdrop of science, which is so compelling. It gives you an opportunity as a resident to say, okay, so what do I do? And there are a lot of things that we can do.
Karen, let's stick with you for one more minute. I'm also struck with how much we know, but how little is getting through. And so you've been struggling with this issue of how to communicate, how to capture that new agitation that Mary just expressed that she's feeling tonight. Which is about spurring action by the people that you need to work with you in Washington and in Springfield and across Chicago. So what do you think we're not doing well, or where do you think there's some promise in communicating?
Yeah. And communication's always a challenge, and there's so many things out there in the world that people can worry about, and this one sometimes feels far away. I actually think that one of the really compelling facts is Tom, and it's everybody talks about the weather. And we're noticing that the weather is weird. And that opens the door to a lot of conversations. Why is it weird? What can we do? Oh, there are things that I, in fact, as a resident can do. So I think it's how can we find more ways to take a big concept, not make it threatening, but make it personal. And then that gives you an opportunity and a seat at the table.
I think that leads us to you, Tom. We are inviting each of you to comment quickly on what you heard from each other tonight already, what you'd like to reinforce, maybe a question that you have, but help us make the most of the four of you being together tonight.
Well, you know, we have on this panel in Don somebody whose work and his career has been devoted to understanding climate change, and I think it should be pointed out that Don was one of the driving forces behind an initiative that shows that humans can, if we put our minds to it and if we work together, do something about a huge environmental problem. And I'm thinking in terms of the Montreal Protocol that Don championed and shepherded through with his colleagues. This is the international agreement that banned the use of chlorofluorocarbons as propellants in aerosol cans. We knew these chemicals to be extremely destructive to the troposphere or the stratospheric ozone layer. And as a group, we signed on internationally, and the word is out again this week that there are signs the ozone layer is repairing itself. The hole that occurs over the Arctic that had been growing is starting to shrink. It's a slow process, and Don understands it better than anybody. But I can't help but think this is instructive, and it shows that if we work together and don't look at this as some kind of attack on us. I was watching some video before I came over here of a congressional hearing where they were taking on the president's science advisor. Some of these legislators have clearly a poor understanding of the science involved. Science education is critically important. I mean, we've got to have an informed public, and I'm afraid sometimes we don't. So these people who cherry pick these notions that the problem really doesn't exist raise doubts in people's minds about whether or not we should be taking action. Right. And we've got to address this and start telling people this is not a hoax. This isn't a big, conspiracy. This isn't some political agenda anybody's on. This is about our climate. And there are things we can take, and I think maybe if we look at it in a positive vein, I mean, this is the basis for potential industries that could make us a world leader if we approach it instead of looking at it as a problem, which it is. But I mean, look at what we can do to mitigate these problems. Invest money in wind technology and how to harness tide fluctuations to generate our electricity and things like this. I mean, there are industries that made this country great, that we developed to address issues like this, and the next generation fuels. This need not be a bad thing. And I think people think of this as some sort of increasing the government's ability to tax us on things and all, but on the other hand, if we looked at it as a positive, where we could develop industries that facilitate changes that would mitigate the release of greenhouse gases, this could be a net positive. And I think the Montreal Protocol is a gigantic illustration.
Well, and you emphasize several positive things, which we rely on you to do, Tom, is to hit those positives that science education, not just for our elected officials, but for our youth, is so important. And they are receptive, and they care, and they're concerned. So having them lead the way, and then showing that trend line on the graph can be bent is very positive. And that there is actually, in adaptation, economic development opportunities for all of us. So those are some very positive messages. Sometimes in the ones that scare us, we forget that there's an opportunity as well. Don, I wanted to bring you into this commentary and conversation as well.
Okay, thank you. I thought before I'd follow on what Tom said, I think it's be good for us to recognize that one of our guests in the audience tonight is Sir David King.
Yes.
Who is Sir David is former science advisor under 2 different prime ministers of the UK, and is now representing the UK in terms of climate change in I assume in international regulatory actions, representing the Foreign Office. And so I thought it'd be good if we could allow David just to give a few words about his thoughts about this issue.
We're delighted to have you here, and this is a perfect transition to our audience participation. Sir David, welcome.
Yes, thank you.
Why don't you come over to the side so people can hear you? Why don't you come over here so you can look at the crowd?
Where do you want me?
Right here.
Thank you very much. I'm absolutely delighted to be with you this evening. Let me just say 2 things very quickly. In 2001, I had a team determine what the biggest impact of climate change would be on the British Isles. And I'm stressing here we are an island nation, and so the biggest impact, no surprise, is from rising sea levels, storms at sea, and storms inland. Combination of attack on our coastal defenses and fluvial flooding happening at once. And so I set up a team of 110 experts, slightly smaller than your team, and we worked for nearly 3 years to put a report into government on the impacts of flooding in the event of climate change continuing out to 2080 and beyond. And the conclusion was quite dire. We understood from this report that our coastal cities would be under severe threat, that it would be extremely difficult to defend under the business as usual scenario. So when the question came through about adaptation, I have to say that back then we were taking the decision we have to adapt and we have to mitigate. We knew that the impact on the British Isles was going to be severe because climate was changing anyway, and we knew that we had to be on a pathway to lower emissions in order to manage the flood defenses of the United Kingdom out into the future. Now, there are 2 outcomes of that big program that I set up in Britain. The first was that Parliament, when they heard my report, responded in a way that was quite dramatic. There was a real understanding and an acceptance that the chief scientific advisor, as I was then, was somebody to be relied on. There was not a questioning of the science that underlay this, but there was a much greater concern that people's houses were likely to be flooded. And this was true right across the United Kingdom. So the outcome was eventually, after much deliberation, a Climate Change Act of Parliament passed by all 3 political parties. There were 650 votes, 6 votes against, committing the country into the future. 2050, we will have reduced our emissions of carbon dioxide by 80%. To date, we have achieved a 29% reduction compared with 1990. So we're on a pathway to achieve more than 50% reduction by 2030. So we're taking the pain early and reaching that 2050 80% target in a relatively easy fashion in the last 20 years. Now, but the second thing was to understand that because the impacts of climate change were coming through anyway, that we had to manage the risks to flooding. And so we began to spend an additional £500 million a year on our flood defenses and on water management. Now, I'm going to tell you that we had, as Tom and Don have just mentioned, our worst flooding for hundreds of years, if not in many ways, the worst ever. Right? So we had storms at sea, we had storms inland. The incursion, because of the higher level of the sea, the incursion inland was further than ever before. And we had the Thames flooding time and time again. That program of action that we put in for adaptation meant that we defended all of our major assets. You will have seen much of the country under floodwater from the aerial pictures of the country. London was not flooded once, and yet I've just said to you that the Thames was flooded. The Thames barrier was built to defend London from flooding, and when it was built, it was expected to be used once every 6 years. We used it 52 times between December and January. Right? Every time we used it, the estimate is that we probably saved about £200 billion worth of damage. The floodwaters had to go somewhere, and they were backed up and went into floodplains. So when you saw pictures of Britain from the air, it was the floodplains absolutely full of water. And this happened time and again, but no major assets lost. Yes, we lost, the damage is probably about £1 billion. But having an adaptation policy fully in place, I believe we were the first country in the world to have a full adaptation policy against the impacts of climate change. That was a very important position for Britain to be in. Now, in terms of, was that a climate change event? Every climate scientist will know you don't say yes. We simply say we were predicting floods of that kind occurring more frequently with climate change, and by 2080, actually occurring so frequently that the damage would be extraordinary. So this was the first lesson. Now let me just, if I have a few seconds more, a tiny bit, just say that we've moved on. And in addition to pushing our own action on reducing emissions, we have an enormous diplomatic effort. So I'm now in the Foreign Office, representing the Foreign Secretary on climate change. We have 80 climate attachés full-time in our embassies around the world working on nothing but climate diplomacy.
Wow.
We have 30 people in the Foreign Office in London. We have formed a Department of Energy and Climate Change to put energy and climate change policies together through one Secretary of State. And this department has another 100 people working on climate negotiations. So we have the biggest effort in the world on climate policy. We are looking forward to the point where the United States joins us and overtakes us in the leadership of the world on this, the most important diplomatic challenge to our planet of our era. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. What a terrific addition, inspiration, and I also take it as a challenge. Being the competitive Americans we are, we do know we are behind, and we need inspiration. So thank you for sharing that. We are going to take a few questions from the audience. We might go back and forth. So we have about 15 minutes or so, maybe a little bit more for questions. So please come to the side to one of these two microphones and briefly introduce yourself, your question. If you want to pose it to a particular person, please feel free.
Thank you so much. Thank you for risk of it being Brits night here. I have a question and I'll explain why I'm asking it. The question is, how do we win people over this huge gulf between the people. If you ask them, they say climate change is a problem. We know the majority, even in America, say that. But I can guarantee if I go out on the street now and I ask people, tell me the biggest problems we face, virtually none of them will mention climate change, this disconnection. And just to explain, the reason I'm doing this is I've spent the last 2 years studying this. I'm actually in Chicago on a book tour for my book, which is called Don't Even Think About It, Why Our Brains Are Wired to Ignore Climate Change. And I've been asking the world's leaders, leading thinkers on this. Also asking a lot of people across America, spending like a day with a tea party, for example, asking them, why don't you believe in this? What's going wrong? And just to say, the conclusion I came to is that it's all in the story. But with respect to you and the IPCC, the information, we can keep that one corner of our brain indefinitely. It seems that it's the story, and the story based on values, the things we care about, where it transfers into the stuff we really want to take action on. Just that question for you. What do you think is going on, please?
Thank you. That's a terrific question, and I think it relates to all of us, the challenge.
Hold the book up, if you would. That's just, yes.
Available on Amazon?
Yes.
Please reread the title of this book. Oh, thank you. Very interesting.
Yes.
Well, I'm sorry, it seemed like such a self-serving plug.
It's okay.
No, it's okay. It is.
You're in the right place.
Right.
Thank you.
We need your help.
I need your help. I need brand help.
Yes.
The book is called Don't Even Think About It, Why Our Brains Are Wired to Ignore Climate Change.
Perfect.
My name is George Marshall. It came out 2 weeks ago, and I'm doing a US book tour to promote it.
Wow. Thank you. And you spoke last night, right? At the Harold Washington Library at a Chicago Wilderness event. So thank you. So which one of you would like to take a crack at that first?
I'll take a quick shot. There was a study a couple years ago out of Yale University that showed that, I think it was the 6 types of Americans, and they, so there's people that readily accept the science and would just trust the scientists. There's those that are, ever progressively more skeptical, to those who won't accept it at all. And that group, which is about 15–16% of our society, you'll never convince. And it's so abhorrent to their political or economic beliefs or whatever that you're not going to change them. And so communication, so it really is a problem. We need to convince those people in the middle. And communication really is key. Like most scientists, I'm a nerd. I really relate to the Big Bang Theory, that popular comedy show, because those are my friends. But nonetheless, I'm trying to learn how to be a better communicator. I still have a long ways to go. I've worked on this already for a number of years, and I try to work with some of the top communicators in the country to try to get the word out about this. But it's not easy, and we're still learning how to do that.
Yeah, it is amazing to me. If I post anything that even smacks of suggesting that there is climate change underway, there's a certain group that comes out and they throw all the same facts at you. I don't know, the intransigence to me is just incredible. I can't understand how you bury your head in the sand and look at what's going on and not say, hey, there's something unusual happening here. I heard a talk show address this issue. Why is there such revulsion at the notion that climate may be changing, or why are people so ready to dismiss this? It was Michael Smerconish, and he opened this up to his audience. And I thought some of the responses were awfully interesting. They said there's a group that doesn't like government involvement in our lives. They like to be independent, and they see this as an opening for the government to dictate more aspects of our lives, to put regulations on and things like this, and they're going to fight it at all costs. They're going to be blind to the consequences of the problems that are at the heart of this issue, and they're going to fight it. And I think that's probably the best explanation of what's going on. I wonder sometimes, as wonderful as the work that Al Gore did, I wonder if having a politician having been front and center in raising this issue might not have turned off a certain segment themselves, because immediately they see this as solely a political issue and not as a moral issue and an issue about our safety and so forth. And I wonder if maybe that's not part of the problem. But that's why I think the environmentalists are well served when they talk about the positives about the response that we can put forth in this. Job creation. Our president has tried, you know, and he's shot down when he tries to do that. But there are, you know, there are ways to look at this as a job creator. I mean, have economic benefits as well as safety benefits in our lives.
No question.
But it is a real problem, and the people that are against this, if you watched our elected representatives debating with our science advisor, the president's science advisor, one of them was asking why the wobbling of the Earth isn't incorporated within our climate models, the Milankovitch notions. And this has to do with cycles that are tens of thousands of years in length. It doesn't address the issue of short-term climate change. But they were using this as a notion to shoot down his assertion that this is really a problem. Somebody else asked, this is one of our elected representatives in this country, at what level CO2 levels become dangerous to our health? Well, that's not the issue. The issue is the fact that CO2 holds on to and re-radiates heat, therefore changes the thermal balance in our atmosphere and distribution. And,
diversions and misconceptions. And
so I think it's just a continuing education. To have a man of this caliber and the caliber of the people you see, Mary and Karen on the stage talking about it is good. It's what we all ought to be doing.
Well, and I think we've actually moved the ball down the field a little bit tonight in thinking about how to reach that malleable middle, that persuadable middle with actionable arguments, fact-based arguments tonight. We've got a queue here, which is terrific. So we're going to use our time to get through as many of these as we can.
Unfortunately, you're all going to have to turn this way.
Oh, all right.
But I'll move on. Here. I'm Lee Crumbaugh. I'm International President of the Association for Strategic Planning. And I'm duty-bound to say thank you to the panel, to our moderator.
Thank you for organizing.
Thank you.
To LiveLab, and for all of you to make this happen. This is a spectacular event.
Thank you.
Collinson, John Sterling, Richard Faulkner from our local chapter have put this together, but you folks have stepped forward, and this has become a global event. So first of all, I need to say thank you, but I actually have a question.
Great.
Far too long ago, I published a magazine called DuPage Magazine. I'm a DuPager, but I've been involved on a metropolitan basis. I saw some city-suburb separation there in terms of per capita use of energy and so on. And I'd like to hear from the panel and maybe the moderator about how we can pull our whole metro area together to address this issue on a concerted basis. Thank you.
Karen, do you want to start?
Yeah.
Feel free to move to Chicago. Wonderful place.
It is.
But you know, certainly there are shared opportunities, and I think the more we can find shared opportunities, the faster we get to bigger answers. One interesting thing was we actually did an analysis of green jobs, and we looked at green jobs in Chicago and in the metro area. The percentage was about the same. So when we think of economic opportunities, they exist throughout this region. And when you think about long-term economic opportunities, think about something like argon. So the national lab is here in our Chicagoland region. That's the place that the federal government has chosen as its energy storage hub. So $120 million of research money is going in there on batteries. That matters for all of us because that's what we need to address the intermittency issues with renewables, so you can have solar power at night if you've got the right storage. And it's what we need for that next generation of transportation, so you can run your cars off of electricity and we can increasingly then green that grid. So there are long-term economic plays that are also coming for our region. And as we think about it, there are some wonderful parts of Chicagoland. And just looking at that great urban planning, so there are more opportunities to walk in every neighborhood. There are more opportunities to have transit between the places that you need to go, and there can be more efficient homes and buildings in every place. And we can really, really take advantage of this great place that we all live.
I think Karen hit it perfectly. That lots of communities are retrofitting their communities and thinking about walkable destinations and reasons why people who are aging can stay in their communities but access transit. And so whether it's DuPage or McHenry, Kane or Cook, all parts of our region recognize really in the foreclosure crisis, the worst areas of foreclosure outside of the city of Chicago were the most isolated communities. So if you want an economically vibrant community, you're going to build differently for the future with a variety of housing types, a variety of transportation, and that's going to be good for the climate emissions. We're going to continue on this side with questions.
Hi, I'm Emily Egan, and thank you for taking my question. It's a great discussion on a global and national scale, but I'd like to go back to something Karen mentioned, the smaller scale, the home scale. And with so much of Chicago's property dedicated to private residential land, I'm wondering if you can talk about any strategies or market-based solutions that we have to encourage private homeowners to be more prepared for climate change.
Thanks, Emily.
Sure, and the opportunities at home are there for all of us. If you're a renter, a condo owner, a homeowner, it starts with what's that energy use in your home? So there are, first of all, programs that actually exist to help that have dollars available to you. Mary mentioned some of this earlier, but there is an energy efficiency funding that is available. You can access it if you're a resident in Chicago by calling 855-9-IMPACT. Go to Retrofit Chicago. But it's things like, don't have the lights on when you're not there. It's things like looking at the insulation in your home. Are you leaking air in and out? Chances are you might have a room that's colder and a room that's warmer. Well, it'll be more comfortable if it's better insulated. It's also going to start to reduce your emissions and save your impacts. And then certainly the appliances question. If you're looking for that new appliance, buying the one that is more efficient. And so a big piece starts with what you can actually do in your home, looking at what the temperature is, setting it, there are smart thermostats that can help you manage it during the course of the day. But it's very much energy use in your home. And then it gets very much into how you move around your neighborhood. Are there ways for you to walk, to take a bike, to bundle trips? Really great opportunities there. So there's a lot that we all can do on a day-to-day basis, and there's a lot that you can do in your home as a renter or an owner.
Thanks for that question.
Hi, everyone. My name is Natalie Lachuk, and thank you so much to the panelists for being here today. This is a great honor to be a part of this event. I have a quick question for Mary. You mentioned during your presentation today about the importance of voting and has that could be a positive impact for creating change. But I was wondering whether that was really true, because in some ways I really wonder about, there's term limits on politicians, but CEOs at large petrochemical companies don't have term limits, and I wonder what you think about that in terms of really being an obstacle to really implementing the right type of energy policies that we need to have in order to reduce the impacts on climate change.
Thanks.
So you brought up a couple of really important points. I think that in terms of implementing some of these longer-term solutions, that's why you need actually laws, regulations, legislation, because that incorporates them into the legal fabric of our country, and they go on beyond the term limits or the limits of any given politician. And so one of the important things we need to do is focus again on national climate legislation. But in the absence of that, we have to look at the kinds of programs I was talking about that the Obama administration is just proposing right now, this Clean Power Program for existing power plants and whatever, because if that becomes law, that will actually regulate the reduction of emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, it's proposed to go final as a law in June of 2015 and carry on through 2030 with these very dramatic reductions. So I think that's important. The other thing I want to say, because I ran out of time, because there's so much to talk about in this area, is that businesses across this country are doing some remarkable things in terms of sustainability. So you've got businesses like Google, eBay, UPS, the list goes on and on, actually on their own going out and buying credits, trying to promote people to take reductions in greenhouse gases and buying those credits to minimize their impact on the environment. There's a huge amounts of efforts going on in industries right now, and I mentioned one earlier in terms of this effort by companies to come together and reduce hydrofluorocarbons. So I actually think business is more of a leader in many respects than many of the people that we see in our elected offices.
Yes, a couple more.
Hi, my name is Luis Flores. I'm a professor at Loyola University here in Chicago, and I was telling Natalie that she stole half of my question. Yeah, I mean, teaching business and teaching management, I've gotten to see a lot of companies. Many are run by good people, and many are not necessarily run by good people. But I can visualize, board of directors, head of strategic planning, CEOs, thinking about the implications of, climate change regulations coming and the effect that it will have in their profits and the possibility of long-term existence. And I can see those people also doing a lot of lobbying and a lot of donations to the people that is actually, opposing climate change. And I think that we have to put a lot of effort in finding that out and seeing what is happening. The other thing that came to my mind is, I don't know if you guys have explored the religion, certain religions and their impact on climate change. I mean, some religions might believe that if God, if you can change the world, well, maybe God is not so powerful after all, right? So those kinds of things is what I would like to see what you guys think about. Thank you.
Any comments from the panelists on that comment? Thank you. Yes? You're up next.
Okay. And I'd like to say, I thank each and every one of you. This has been great. And for myself, I'm a horticulturalist, and one of my main passions is to tie our youth to this very issue. And is that in our schools and in our school gardens to change the landscape in that school where it becomes more an environmental learning lab and connect our youth back to science to lay the groundwork from the science, because they can also impact their parents and some of the adults. And that's where one of my passions lie. But also a lot of our small enterprises have a major role. As a landscape contractor, we have a major role there, and we can change the aspects of plants, educate the consumer, and as I develop my business, I'm have you or the City of Chicago's website on my site, because people need to be going back to that site to get more information and do that on a consistent base. So I commend you all, and this is great, and I'm very passionate about it too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please, Tom.
Working with Don and I've done a program on World Environment Day at the Chicago Botanic Garden, and their scientists are at work trying to better understand the native species of plants that sequester CO2 from the air. It turns out there's a form of native grass in Illinois that does a more effective job in leaching CO2 out of the atmosphere and sequestering it. And they stress this isn't the whole answer, but there aren't whole answers to this. There are myriad small little impacts that we can all make. And I thought that goes along the line with our last questioner.
Absolutely. Yeah. How much of a difference removing some of those vast lawns and putting in deep root vegetation would make. We've got a lot of progress to make in capturing rainwater and stormwater in response to these extreme weather events, because in so many areas of the challenges we face, we literally can't build our way out of it. We have to adapt, and each one of you have helped us so much with the understanding of that tonight. There's more that could be discussed, and that's what's both exciting and also a bit frustrating. We hope that some of you can linger with the panelists and with each other as we conclude tonight. I want to give another shout out and big thanks. A lot of the people you see around the room are LiveLab talent, and they made tonight possible, so I want to give them a big round of applause. And to all of the organizations who helped make tonight possible, we're really grateful. We have a couple of resources on the screen. First of all, the National Climate Assessment is the place to go for all the facts, 150 pages or 650 pages. You can get it all. And then you also have the 4 additional sites that there's of course more, but these are 4 that we would recommend to you. From the City of Chicago, all of the information that you heard from Karen tonight is at Sustainable Chicago 2015's website on the top left. The Environmental Defense Fund is a tremendous resource as well. Climate Central is a collaboration of journalists and scientists that we would commend to you. And then NASA's website is the climate component of that are also tremendous resources. So we hope that you stay in touch with good information, with leaders, and I want to end by thanking our panelists, Don and Karen, Mary, Tom, thank you so much for your efforts. Each one of them put a lot of time into preparing tonight, and thank you for giving us your evening and for spending it together learning and preparing for action. Thank you.